You're listening to APU Spotlight. This is your host, Ariana Schell. Our guest today is Tim Schell, who has recently completed the A Adventure 16 3-Peak Challenge, Mount Whitney, the Mission Trails Regional Park 5-Peak Challenge, ending with 6 hikes totaling at about 58 miles. These hikes required intense preparation, and during the 2 years total needed to train for these hikes, Tim managed to lose about 50 pounds, increase his heart health, and discover new insight on God's timing for his life. Tim, most people hear the number of miles required for these hiking challenges and run the other way. What made you want to start hiking and pursue these challenges?
I started hiking with some friends on Black Friday, and we did a hike up Potato Chip Rock here in San Diego County, and I thought it would be no problem to hike 10 miles. But on the way up, I realized I was completely wrong, and I realized how out of shape I was. And I felt really bad about that. So when those same friends asked me a few weeks later if I wanted to hike Mount Whitney with them, I thought, wow, wouldn't that be great if I could do that? But after I'd just done this last hike, I realized I had a lot of work to do. And so I did tell them, yeah, that sounds good, but I'm going to start working on it, but you're going to have to give me some time. So I started then slowly working my way up so that I could be prepared someday to hike Mount Whitney.
Can you describe what the point of these hiking challenges are?
Yes, the Adventure 16 3-Peak Challenge is a way for them to encourage people to go outdoors. Adventure 16 is an outdoors outfitters store, and so by encouraging their customers to go outdoors, they have more business. They help people learn how to do hikes. They have presentations at their store, and it's an advertising thing for them. But for us, the hikers, we gain an opportunity to have planned hikes and to compete or to have our names put on their website after completing them. So it's a way to share your experiences with other friends and other outdoors people, and they do it 3 different ways or 4 different ways. You can complete them in 3 months and you get a certain prize for that. You can complete them in 3 weeks and you get more prizes for that. You can complete them in 3 days in a row and you get even more prizes, or you can complete that hike in 24 hours and you get a really big prize for that. The other hike, the 5-Peak Challenge in Mission Trails Regional Park, is intended to encourage the people of San Diego who do those hikes all the time, encourage them to use different trails and go to different peaks in that park. Usually those people hike up to Coles Mountain quite often, and that makes the trail very crowded. So they're encouraging people that hike Coles Mountain all the time to go out throughout the rest of that big park and hike more peaks.
And how often do you hike?
Well, I try to exercise every day. So I do my little hiking exercise probably 3 or 4 days a week at lunchtime. And my friends and I who've been hiking on different trails, we try to do at least a peak hike up some mountain probably about once a month.
Which has been your favorite hike to complete this far?
Well, I would say my favorite hike that I completed over the last year was the hike to Mount Whitney. That was the point of me doing the first 3-Peak Challenge. That was 3 training hikes that I needed to do so that I could prepare for an all-day, really long, high-altitude hike. And so the 3-Peak Challenge is hiking the 3 highest mountains in Southern California. So they were easier to get to than Mount Whitney, and they were long day hikes that took most of the day, and you had to get up early and drive to them and have all your gear ready, and you had to be really prepared. You had to plan ahead, you had to get permits, you had to do lots of things to prepare for each of those hikes, which is the same thing you had to be ready to do for Mount Whitney. So after completing those 3 hikes, once I completed the longest and highest one of that, which was San Gorgonio, I figured at that point I was ready to hike Mount Whitney. So Mount Whitney was my favorite hike, and it was the 3-Peak Challenge that helped me prepare for that.
Which hike has been most difficult to complete?
Of the 3-peak challenge, the 5-peak challenge in San Diego is actually fairly easy. Those we were able to complete 3 of them in one day and 2 of them in another day. So the 3-peak challenge had the hardest hikes, the day hikes here in Southern California, and the most difficult one there was the longest one and the highest one, which was Mount San Gorgonio. That's about an 18-mile round trip hike, and you go from about 6,000 feet to 11,500 feet.
Are you planning on completing any future challenges?
Yes, right now we're currently planning, my hiking group and I are planning the next challenge, which is called the 5 Hikes for 50 Years in the Anza Borrego Desert State Park. We're planning to do that on 2 Fridays in March of this year. And that will be not very long hikes. They're about 3 or 4 miles each, but they're quite a distance apart. So we're going to do the first 3 of those on the first Friday that we go, and then we're going to do the second 2 hikes on the next Friday. And those will be fun because there's several of us of the hiking group who have never been to the Anza Borrego Desert before, so they'll get to see some new sights.
What would your dream hike be?
Well, my dream hike leading up to this, of course, was Mount Whitney. And after I accomplished that, I felt like, wow, if I could do that, I felt like I could do almost anything. And just was about less than a month later when my nephew, Paul Harlan, was getting married in Denver, Colorado. I went there for the wedding, and I actually hiked 4 Colorado mountain peaks that were over 14,000 feet in 3 days while I was there. So there again, another really fun accomplishment that I was able to do that. So of all the peaks that I know, the hikes that I know of that people do, I think Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa would probably be my dream hike, because that is a 7-day trip. It takes you 7 days to get to the top of that mountain. It's very high, but you don't need a lot of special gear to do that one like you would if you wanted to try something like Mount Everest or some of the other really high mountains. You have to have ice gear, you have to have oxygen, you have to have all kinds of stuff like that. I would just like to do Mount Kilimanjaro because you can do that with regular hiking gear.
How has hiking impacted the lives of others around you?
Well, I think the other person that has done most of the hikes with me, his name is Terry Lutz. He is 70 years old, and he is in pretty good shape. He does a lot of mountain biking and running. I think the 2 of us working together, we felt like a team, and we'd known each other before, but after that we got to know each other really well. And I think when we were hiking, doing some of our preparation hikes on our trip, our Mount Whitney trip, the first big mountain that we hiked there, it's called an acclimation hike. You want to hike at high altitude before you do Mount Whitney so you can make sure you don't get altitude sickness. After that, it was a 14-mile hike, which he and I had hiked longer distances. We had hiked San Gorgonio and San Jacinto and Mount Baldy, and they were all about as long as that. But after that hike, he was telling me, Tim, I don't think I can make it up Mount Whitney. And I had to tell him, Terry, I think you can. We're ready. We can do all of this. And fortunately, he hung in there with me. And when we were done with that hike, we were both on a mountain. We felt like we were at the top of the world. And so we really got to know each other well, and working together as a team to make it up to the top of the mountain was really, really a lot of fun.
What has been the most impactful element hiking has brought to your life?
Well, I think the most impactful element was the thought that I could accomplish this big goal of hiking Mount Whitney when I started out a couple years before that, being so out of shape that I could hardly hike 10 miles in San Diego here at a very low altitude. And so by setting that big goal for myself and working toward it day after day, it kind of brought back the thoughts that, God can help me do anything.
And I know hiking has impacted your strength in walking with friends, including Terry Lutz, but how has hiking also impacted your walk with God? Can you elaborate on that more?
Yes, when I think about that, I think about how God had a plan for me the whole way along. So I think from the time I started, the 2 years before, from that time, He had a plan set out that He was going to give me this goal to do. He was going to make it happen on a certain day of a certain year, because at the time that I was at the top of Mount Whitney on this, felt like I was, on top of the world, that was the time that my wife called me on my cell phone at the top of the mountain and told me that my father had just passed away. And God had prepared me so that I would have the opportunity to be on top of the world when I heard one of the most devastating and difficult pieces of news of my life, that my father had passed away. And there was nothing I could do about it. All I could do was say, thank you, Lord, for having a plan. And once that happened, and I thought about how many things had to line up for all that to happen, for us to be up there on the top of the mountain on that day, when I had been working on this for 2 years, and all the days had been planned ahead of time, I realized that God really had a plan for me, and He was looking out for me. And I now know that for the rest of my life, God has a plan, and He will help me through anything that I will need to face.
This was Tim Schell commenting on his journey in completing the A Adventure 16 3-Peak Challenge, Mount Whitney, and the Mission Trails Regional Park 5-Peak Challenge, and how it has impacted his life and spiritual walk. Thank you, Tim. You have been listening to APU Spotlight. I'm your host, Ariana Schell. Music today was brought to you by Ben Sound.